In June of 1942, behind sealed walls inside a General Motors factory in Anderson, Indiana, a production line unlike any in American industrial history ran without pause. 300 workers operated under strict wartime secrecy. They were forbidden from speaking about their tasks, even to their own families. Their work had nothing to do with automobiles. Instead, they were producing pistols, crude, single-shot firearms built not for durability, accuracy, or even conventional combat. These weapons were engineered for only one purpose: to be made in enormous numbers, as fast and as cheaply as mechanically possible. Internal records indicate that a complete pistol rolled off the line every 6.6 seconds. By the end of August, nearly 1 million of these strange weapons would be completed. Official paperwork referred to the project, using deliberately misleading language. The barrel was not called a barrel, it was a tube. The trigger became a yoke. The firing pin was renamed a control rod. The weapon's official designation, FP-45, stood for flare projector, .45 caliber. A deliberate falsehood intended to obscure the true nature of the program from Axis intelligence. The men and women who built them used a far more cynical nickname. They called it the Woolworth pistol, because at just over $2 per unit, the finished weapon cost less than a decent pair of shoes in 1942. The strategic concept behind the pistol was radical. Instead of arming organized resistance movements with quality firearms and explosives, American planners believed they could weaponize entire civilian populations inside occupied Europe. Hundreds of thousands of these pistols would be dropped by aircraft across Nazi-controlled territory. Farmers, shopkeepers, factory workers, and laborers would suddenly possess an assassination tool. Each pistol was expected to kill a single German soldier at close range, allowing the civilian to seize the soldier's rifle. The important factor was not firepower or tactical usefulness. It was fear. If every civilian might possess such a weapon, German occupation forces would be forced to treat all civilians as potential killers. The occupation, planners believed, would become psychologically unbearable, forcing Germany to divert thousands of troops into rear area security. The man who turned this theory into a physical object was George Hyde, a German-born American firearms engineer working for General Motors and Land Manufacturing Division. Hyde had already designed the M3 grease gun, a submachine gun built for simplified mass production. For this new project, he stripped the handgun down even further. Everything considered non-essential was removed. The finished pistol measured just over 5.5 inches long, weighed roughly 1 pound, and consisted primarily of stamped steel parts spot-welded together. The barrel was a smooth-bore steel tube with no rifling at all. This meant the bullet would begin tumbling almost immediately after leaving the muzzle, making accuracy beyond a few yards largely a matter of luck. This was not poor engineering. It was cost engineering. Rifling machinery was expensive. The pistol only needed to work once. Using the weapon was awkward, slow, and borderline absurd. After firing a single round, the user had to pull back the zinc cocking knob, rotate it 90 degrees, raise the hinged breechplate, insert a wooden dowel through the muzzle to eject the spent brass casing, manually insert a new cartridge, close the breech, and rotate the cocking knob back into position. The entire process could easily take 30 seconds or more. Ironically, it took far longer to reload the weapon than it took to manufacture it. Each pistol was packaged in a waxed cardboard box, along with a wooden ejector dowel. 10 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition produced at the Frankfurt Arsenal, and a 12-panel instruction sheet. The instructions used no words at all. Every step, from loading the pistol to firing it, was shown entirely through pictures so that any user, regardless of language or literacy, could theoretically understand how to operate it. What the instructions did not teach was marksmanship. The weapon was intended for contact distance ambush, not aimed fire. General Motors managed the project with extreme secrecy. Several of its divisions participated in component production. Despite having no background in firearms manufacturing, this was considered an advantage. Workers unfamiliar with conventional gun design would be less likely to question the pistol's crude construction. Frigidaire cut barrels at a rate of roughly 600 per hour. Saginaw steering gear produced barrel bushings. Detroit Transmission manufactured barrel collars. The guide lamp division handled final assembly. Every pistol was test-fired at least once, consuming more than 1.5 million rounds of ammunition during proofing. Contemporary accounts refer to occasional handling accidents during testing, though later collector claims of widespread injuries have never been consistently verified in official records. On paper, the Liberator project seemed revolutionary. In practice, it collapsed under the weight of strategic and logistical reality almost as soon as production ended. By late 1942, hundreds of thousands of pistols were stockpiled, primarily in Britain, awaiting distribution that never truly came. Theater commanders were deeply skeptical. Supreme Allied Command did not believe the plan was practical or militarily effective. Of the roughly 500,000 pistols shipped to Britain, fewer than 25,000 were ever authorized for potential emergency use. The logistical problem alone was staggering. British Whitley bombers could carry only about 600 pistols per mission. Distributing even 500,000 units would have required more than 800 dedicated flights. At a time when every aircraft was desperately needed for bombing German infrastructure and troop concentrations, diverting that capacity for pistol drops was considered wasteful. Air power was far too valuable to expend on what many commanders viewed as a psychological experiment with uncertain payoff. Other Allied commanders shared the same view. General Joseph Stilwell expressed no interest in the weapon for operations in China and Burma. General Douglas MacArthur was initially dismissive as well. Only later did MacArthur approve a limited request of approximately 50,000 units for the Pacific Theater. This would ultimately become the only area where meaningful distribution is documented. About 8,000 pistols reached native villages in the Solomon Islands. Additional shipments were delivered by submarine to guerrillas in the Philippines. A small number of original pistols recovered in those regions confirm that at least some did reach operational areas. What they actually accomplished remains unclear. The Office of Strategic Services eventually received roughly 450,000 Liberators transferred from the US Army, yet even the OSS showed little enthusiasm for deploying them. When supplying resistance movements, operatives overwhelmingly preferred reliable, multi-shot weapons, such as Sten submachine guns, pistols, explosives, and sabotage equipment. The Liberator was rarely included in their loadouts and never distributed on the massive scale originally envisioned. Nowhere is the gap between legend and reality larger than in France. Post-war stories frequently described French resistance fighters assassinating German officers with Liberator pistols during the occupation. These stories have circulated for decades, repeated in magazines, documentaries, and collector lore. Yet detailed historical research tells a different story. Ralph Hagen, whose 1996 study of the weapon remains the most comprehensive work on the subject, interviewed Allied intelligence officers, OSS and SOE operatives, and French resistance veterans. His conclusion was stark. There is no evidence that the Liberator was ever distributed in any significant quantity within occupied France. The French Maquis received more than 85,000 Sten guns in 1944 alone. They also received rifles, pistols, explosives, radios, and medical supplies. The Liberator played no meaningful role in their operations. If any pistols did reach France at all, their numbers were so small as to be operationally irrelevant. The widely repeated image of resistance fighters carrying Liberators through Parisian streets simply does not survive archival scrutiny. The ultimate fate of most Liberator pistols reinforces how little they were used. After the war, massive quantities were declared surplus. Hundreds of thousands were either scrapped, melted down, or dumped at sea. Some estimates suggest that more than 400,000 units were disposed of this way. Large shipments sent to India were reportedly discarded into the Indian Ocean rather than distributed. Precise disposal records are incomplete, but it is clear that the majority of the pistols never reached any battlefield at all. This brings us to the central question that has driven the Liberator's legend for decades. Did these weapons actually terrify German soldiers across occupied Europe? The documentary record strongly suggests the answer is no. No authenticated Wehrmacht or Gestapo directives referring to the Liberator have been found. No German security memoranda addressing a threat from concealed American pistols exist in the Bundeswehr. No occupation-era warnings to garrison troops about armed civilians equipped with American assassination pistols have ever been produced. The supposed German terror narrative appears almost exclusively in American collector literature and popular retellings, not in enemy records. The psychological warfare theory behind the Liberator was real. It was genuinely proposed by the Joint Psychological Warfare Committee in 1942. The idea that mere awareness of armed civilians could break the morale of occupying forces was widely discussed, but the theory was never tested at scale because the weapons were never distributed at scale. Without mass distribution, there could be no widespread awareness. Without awareness, there could be no widespread psychological terror. Only a single wartime account is routinely cited as evidence of a Liberator kill. It comes from a book called D-Day Through German Eyes by a man named Holger Eck. In it, a German military policeman named Nicholas Langer allegedly described witnessing the assassination of a Panzer officer on the morning of D-Day using what he called a Browning assassination pistol, which he claimed was one of thousands circulating in France. This account has severe credibility problems. Multiple historians have questioned the authenticity of both the author and the witness. Giles Milton publicly stated that there is no record of Eckertz or Langer in any other publication, no listing in German directories, and no independent corroboration of the incident. The book's publisher has no other known titles. The German National Library has no record of the author. In short, the only commonly cited eyewitness account of a Liberator kill may be entirely fictional. The Baltimore Police Museum summarizes the issue bluntly. There are no documented, authenticated cases of any Nazi or Japanese soldier being killed by a resistance fighter or guerrilla using a Liberator pistol. Ian McCollum of Forgotten Weapons reached the same conclusion after years of research. The Liberator has no measurable, verifiable impact on the war effort. Supporters of the legend often argue that the absence of evidence proves nothing. After all, the pistol had no serial numbers. It was designed to be untraceable. Resistance groups did not keep detailed logs that might be captured, and many pistols were destroyed after use or dumped into rivers and seas. These points are valid, but absence of evidence is not evidence of use. In historical analysis, claims require documentation. With the Liberator, documentation of combat use simply does not exist. There is exactly one wartime photograph known to show a Liberator in operational context. It depicts the pistol tucked into the waistband of an Asian man in Kunming, China. There is no indication that it was ever fired in combat. It stands as a sole visual artifact of the weapon in theater. The contrast with British covert weapons could not be sharper. While the Americans pursued quantity and psychological theory, the British Special Operations Executive took the opposite approach. They developed the Welrod silenced pistol for trained operatives. It featured a rifled barrel, practical accuracy out to roughly 30 yards, and exceptional sound suppression of around 73 decibels. Only about 2,800 Welrods were manufactured during the war, yet the weapon has documented use in World War II, the Falklands War, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and even Vietnam decades later. The Welrod left a professional record because it was built for professionals. The Liberator left legends because it was built for amateurs who were never truly armed. Ultimately, the SO chose not to distribute Liberators in France at all. They relied instead on Sten guns for partisan warfare and on specialized assassins, armed with suppressed pistols for targeted operations. Quality over quantity prevailed in practical covert warfare. The final irony of the Liberator program would only reveal itself decades after the war ended. A weapon designed to produce terror among enemy soldiers achieved its greatest psychological impact not in occupied Europe, but in the American collector market. Original Liberator pistols today sell for anywhere between $1,700 and $5.00 depending on condition and completeness. Fewer than 300 original waxed cardboard boxes are believed to survive. A complete boxed set can exceed the value of the pistol itself. At least one unopened 1942 kit exists and is valued higher than many antique military rifles. In the early 1960s, someone in the intelligence community remembered the old Liberator concept. During the Vietnam War, the CIA commissioned a modernized version known as the Deer gun, designed by Russell Moore. It was lighter, chambered in 9mm, and intended for similar clandestine distribution. Only about 1,000 were manufactured in 1964, after the assassination of President Kennedy. Congress passed legislation requiring the destruction of clandestine devices. Almost all Deer guns were destroyed. An estimated 10 to 25 survive today, selling for over $20,000 each. In both cases, the fundamental flaw was not mechanical. It was conceptual. The idea that mass-distributed single-shot weapons could significantly alter the course of modern warfare underestimated the realities of control, logistics, and human behavior. By the time the Liberator could have been deployed at scale, the war had already shifted into full industrial conflict. Strategic bombing, mass-mechanized armies, and vast supply chains rendered the pistol's original psychological premise obsolete. Return now to that factory in Anderson, Indiana, in June 1942, 300 workers standing on concrete floors, stamped steel parts moving down conveyor belts, barrels welded by men who had once built headlights, proof shots echoing day and night. These workers believed they were building tools of resistance. They believed their cheap, crude pistols would strike fear into the heart of the Nazi occupation. They believed in the theory of terror through industrial production. That theory was never tested, yet something they could never have imagined did occur. 80 years later, their disposable tools of psychological warfare would become some of the most sought-after curiosities of the Second World War. Their wordless instruction sheets would be framed on collectors' walls. Their waxed cardboard boxes would be valued more than the weapons they once contained. The pistol that was never meant to survive would become immortal. The FP-45 Liberator failed at every task it was created to perform. It did not arm Europe. It did not destabilize occupation forces. It did not change the course of the war. What it did accomplish was stranger. It became a powerful myth. And in the realm of psychological warfare, myths often outlive and outmatch the weapons themselves. The numbers are stark and final. Approximately 1 million pistols manufactured, only a small fraction distributed, no verified documented wartime kills, authenticated in specialist literature. Yet one legend grew larger than all of those facts combined. The Liberator did not terrify Nazi officers in 1943, but the story that it did has quietly drained collectors' wallets for generations, and in that peculiar way, the weapon achieved an enduring form of victory that its designers never anticipated.